What if your passport suddenly became useless? What if entire nations were blacklisted overnight, their citizens barred from stepping foot on American soil? That's exactly what's happening right now. The US has unleashed a shocking new immigration crackdown, targeting many African countries and banning their citizens from entry. But why? Who made the list? And what does this mean for millions of Africans who once saw America as a land of opportunity? The answers will leave you stunned. Here, we would like to take a moment and thank you for supporting us and being a valued part of our strong community. And if you are not yet a member, we encourage you to join us and help build an even stronger community together. Let's get started. With Donald Trump returning to the White House in 2025, the U.S. has witnessed one of the most aggressive immigration crackdowns in modern history. His administration has implemented sweeping visa bans, mass deportations, and extreme border controls, disproportionately targeting immigrants from all across the world. Many African immigrants are facing harsh deportation too. The rhetoric of Trump's new immigration policies centers around national security, illegal migration, and visa overstays. The latest U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE data, as of November 24, 2024, reveals that over 1.45 million non-citizens have been identified for deportation, with a significant portion being African nationals. Countries like Somalia, Nigeria, Mauritania, Ghana, Cameroon, and Ethiopia face mass removals under these new enforcement measures. While Trump claims that these policies protect American jobs and security, the reality is that many of the deported individuals have lived in the U.S. for decades, built families, and contributed to society. With diplomatic tensions rising, African nations are pushing back, demanding fairer treatment of their citizens and warning that these deportations will destabilize economies and families. However, Trump's administration remains firm in its stance, threatening economic and visa restrictions on countries that refuse to accept deported nationals. But what African nations are mostly being targeted? Let's go through each nation one by one. Somalia. Somalia faces the highest number of deportations among African nations, with 4,090 individuals identified for removal. Since Trump's first term, Somalia has been classified as a high-risk country due to security concerns and insurgency. The reinstatement of the 2025 Muslim ban has made it nearly impossible for Somali nationals to obtain visas, even for work, study, or family reunification. Somali immigrants in Minnesota, where one of the largest Somali diasporas in the U.S. resides, have voiced outrage over these deportations. Many deportees arrived as children, built families, and integrated into American society, but are now being detained and forced onto deportation flights. Trump's administration refuses to consider Somalia's humanitarian crisis, despite clear evidence that deported individuals risk persecution, violence, and even death. The Somali government has urged the U.S. to reconsider, but Washington remains unmoved. Mauritania. After Somalia, Mauritania has become one of the biggest targets of Trump's immigration policies, with 3,822 Mauritanian nationals identified for deportation. The Black Mauritanian community, historically marginalized and enslaved, faces the risk of re-enslavement or statelessness upon return. Despite repeated warnings from human rights organizations, the Trump administration continues to deport Mauritanians, refusing to grant them asylum or protected status. Many Mauritanians in the U.S. had been living under temporary protected status (TPS), which shielded them from deportation due to conditions in their home country. However, with the program now revoked, thousands face immediate removal, sparking protests and legal battles against these deportations. Mauritania's government, under U.S. pressure, has been forced to accept deportees, despite concerns that many lack documentation, citizenship, or even a safe place to return to. Nigeria. Despite being one of America's strongest African allies, Nigeria has seen 3,690 of its nationals targeted for deportation under Trump's policies. The administration claims that Nigerian immigrants overstay their visas at higher rates. But this narrative ignores the vast contributions Nigerian professionals make to the U.S. economy. Nigerian immigrants dominate fields like medicine, engineering, and finance. Yet Trump's new visa restrictions have made it difficult for them to remain in the U.S. Nigeria's government has been reluctant to accept deported nationals, leading to diplomatic clashes with Washington. Nigerian officials argue that deportations will damage bilateral relations and destabilize families. But Trump has threatened economic penalties if deportees are not accepted. This situation has caused friction between both nations, with Nigerian officials exploring alternative trade and diplomatic partnerships outside of the U.S. Ghana, a longtime diplomatic partner of the U.S., is now facing a crackdown on its nationals too. Data reveals that 258 Ghanaians are set for deportation. Ghanaian immigrants make up a significant portion of the U.S. labor force in healthcare, IT, and skilled industries, yet many are now being treated as unlawful migrants. Ghana's government has warned that these mass deportations will strain the country's economy and social systems, making reintegration extremely difficult. Many deportees lack proper documentation, and some have spent decades in the U.S., making returning to Ghana a near impossible transition. Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Cameroon. Cameroon has been engulfed in one of Africa's most violent conflicts, yet the Trump administration has turned its back on Cameroonian refugees, refusing to grant them asylum protections. With 1,736 Cameroonians now facing deportation, many are being forcibly sent back to a country where war, ethnic violence, and state-sponsored persecution are rampant. For many of these individuals, the U.S. was their last hope for safety, but under Trump's strict immigration policies, their pleas for protection have been denied. The crisis in Cameroon is complex, involving a brutal conflict between government forces and armed separatist groups in the Anglophone regions. Since 2016, thousands of civilians have been killed, imprisoned, or displaced, with villages burned and mass executions carried out by both sides. The UN and human rights organizations have repeatedly classified Cameroon as an unsafe country for returnees. Yet Trump's administration has ignored these warnings, pushing forward with mass deportations. Many Cameroonian deportees are facing immediate danger upon arrival. Reports have surfaced of returnees being arrested, interrogated, and even tortured by government forces, who often view deported individuals as traitors or rebel sympathizers. Others fall victim to separatist militias, who retaliate against civilians suspected of cooperating with the central government. With no system in place to reintegrate them, deported Cameroonians are left stranded, jobless, and in extreme danger. The Trump administration's approach to Cameroonian immigrants stands in stark contrast to previous U.S. policies, which at least acknowledged the dire situation in the country. In 2022, some Cameroonian asylum seekers were granted temporary protected status (TPS) due to the ongoing violence. However, Trump has completely revoked these protections, labeling Cameroonian migrants as illegal entrants rather than refugees in need of protection. Human rights groups, including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have strongly condemned these deportations, warning that the U.S. is violating international law by sending people back to a conflict zone where they could be tortured, executed, or forcibly recruited into armed groups. But despite global outrage, Trump's administration continues to justify these removals, claiming they are necessary to protect American borders. The situation raises serious questions about U.S. foreign policy and immigration ethics. If the U.S. claims to support human rights and democracy, why is it deporting thousands of refugees back to war zones? The fate of deported Cameroonians remains grim, as they are caught in a deadly conflict with no way out. And with Trump's policies only getting harsher, the number of deported Cameroonians is expected to rise in the coming months, making this one of the worst immigration crises in recent African history. Egypt. Egypt, a longtime U.S. ally, is now facing one of the harshest deportation waves under Trump's renewed immigration policies. With 1,461 Egyptians identified for deportation, the administration has cracked down on Egyptian migrants without considering the long-standing diplomatic relationship between the two nations. Despite Egypt being a key strategic partner for the U.S. in military, economic, and regional security affairs, Trump has made no exceptions. treating Egyptian immigrants as part of his broad anti-immigration stance. One of the biggest contradictions in Trump's actions is that his administration continues to support Egypt's government financially, providing billions in military aid while simultaneously removing Egyptian nationals from the U.S. Many of those being deported have lived in America for years, if not decades, building families, businesses, and careers. Now they are being ripped from their lives and forced back, without consideration for their contributions to American society. Even more troubling is that some of these deported Egyptians are political dissidents, individuals who fled the country seeking protection from political persecution. Instead of granting them asylum or legal status, Trump's administration is forcing them back into a system that has a record of imprisoning critics and opposition voices. International human rights groups have warned that these deportations could lead to wrongful arrests or worse, but Trump's policies ignore these warnings entirely. The economic side effects of these deportations are also alarming. Egyptians in the U.S. play a major role in several industries, particularly medicine, engineering, and small businesses. Trump's mass removals will not only disrupt American communities, but also cause financial hardship for families both in the U.S. and in Egypt. Egyptian American communities have strongly condemned the deportations, calling them inhumane and unnecessary. Adding to the hypocrisy, Trump's administration has also restricted visas for Egyptians, making it harder for people to visit family, study, or work in the U.S. The move has angered Egyptian officials, who argue that this policy is unfairly targeting their citizens while other nations continue to have open visa access. Cairo has reportedly pushed back diplomatically, but Trump's administration remains stubborn, refusing to make any adjustments. Trump's immigration crackdown paints a clear picture. His policies are not about security, but about exclusion. Egyptians, despite their long history of contributing to the U.S., are being treated as dispensable, with no regard for human rights, diplomatic ties, or the consequences for deported families. Sudan, a nation still struggling with political uncertainty and economic challenges, has 1,012 of its nationals identified for deportation under Trump's renewed immigration policies. Despite Sudan undergoing a fragile transition after years of dictatorship, Trump's administration has shown no leniency, treating Sudanese immigrants as deportation priorities, rather than individuals seeking stability. Many of those facing deportation had applied for asylum or humanitarian protections, citing political repression and economic hardship as reasons they left Sudan. However, Trump's policies have eliminated many of these legal protections, leaving Sudanese nationals with no choice but to return to an uncertain future. Reports indicate that some returnees have struggled to reintegrate, facing limited job opportunities, unstable governance, and restrictions on freedoms. Adding to the controversy, Sudan is one of the African nations that had previously been banned under Trump's first Muslim ban in 2017, further straining U.S.-Sudan relations. Now, with mass deportations targeting Sudanese nationals once again, the move is being seen as a continuation of Trump's anti-immigrant agenda, rather than a policy based on real security concerns. Sudanese American organizations have criticized the deportations, highlighting the fact that many of those being removed have lived in the U.S. for years, contributing to society and raising families. Yet, under Trump's harsh immigration policies, these individuals are being sent back without regard for their circumstances or the instability they may face upon arrival. Ethiopia. Ethiopians have long established a strong and successful presence in the U.S., contributing to fields like medicine, engineering, business, and academia. However, Trump's administration has singled them out for mass deportations. This decision has shocked Ethiopian American communities, who argue that these deportations are politically motivated and do not reflect any legitimate security concerns. Ethiopia has experienced recent political turmoil, including ethnic conflicts, economic instability, and a fragile transition in governance. Many Ethiopian migrants in the U.S. sought asylum due to political oppression, ethnic violence, or economic hardship, yet Trump's immigration crackdown ignores these realities. Beyond the humanitarian concerns, Ethiopia's government has expressed frustration with the deportations, arguing that it will strain their resources as returnees face uncertain reintegration into a country that is still recovering from conflict. Ethiopian diplomats have attempted to negotiate with U.S. officials, but Trump's administration remains unmoved, continuing to send Ethiopians back without consideration for the country's political and economic realities. Adding insult to injury, Trump has restricted visa access for Ethiopians, making it difficult for students, professionals, and business leaders to enter the U.S. Even Ethiopian families who have legally resided in the U.S. for decades now live in fear of being targeted. Despite Ethiopia being a rising economic powerhouse in Africa, Trump's immigration policies paint all Ethiopian immigrants as a problem rather than recognizing their contributions. Eritrea, one of the most authoritarian nations in Africa, has many nationals on Trump's deportation list, despite clear evidence that returnees could face persecution. Eritrea is notorious for forced military conscription, lack of political freedoms, and severe human rights abuses, yet Trump's administration refuses to grant Eritrean immigrants protection. For decades, Eritreans have fled their country to escape indefinite military service, a system that forcibly recruits young men and women with no guarantee of release. Many Eritreans in the U.S. have applied for asylum, citing the risk of imprisonment, torture, or forced labor if they return. However, under Trump's immigration policies, these asylum claims are being dismissed at alarming rates, and deportation orders are being issued without regard for their safety. Reports indicate that some deported Eritreans have already been detained upon arrival, raising concerns about whether the U.S. is knowingly sending people into danger. Again, human rights organizations have strongly condemned Trump's decision to deport Eritreans, arguing that it violates international human rights law and puts people's lives at risk. Despite these warnings, Trump's administration remains aggressive in its deportation policies, refusing to grant any exemptions or protections for Eritrean nationals. Meanwhile, Eritrean communities in the U.S. are increasingly fearful, as immigration raids continue to target their families, sending many into hiding to avoid being forcibly removed. The situation raises serious ethical questions about U.S. immigration policy. But if you are thinking this will only have an impact on Africa, then you are wrong. Trump's aggressive deportation of African immigrants isn't just a crisis for the individuals being forced out. It's a disaster for the U.S. itself. From economic setbacks to diplomatic tensions, removing thousands of African nationals will create long-term consequences that the administration seems to be ignoring. The economic impact will be undeniable. African immigrants in the U.S. are among the most highly educated and economically productive groups, with a higher percentage of college graduates than the general American population. Many work in critical industries such as healthcare, technology, engineering, and finance, filling jobs that already face labor shortages. With thousands of doctors, nurses, and medical workers now facing deportation, the healthcare system will feel the strain, leading to longer wait times, fewer services, and a decline in medical care in underserved communities. The same will be true for the technology and engineering sectors, where African immigrants play a major role in America's global competitiveness. Removing skilled professionals will only worsen the country's ability to keep up in fields that require innovation and technical expertise. Beyond job losses, African immigrants have built successful businesses that contribute significantly to the U.S. economy. From retail stores and restaurants to logistics companies and tech startups, these businesses provide jobs and stimulate local economies. With deportation stripping entire communities of their entrepreneurs, many small businesses will shut down, leading to lost revenue, unemployment, and a decline in economic activity. The long-term consequences will be felt not just in African immigrant communities, but across cities where these businesses are essential to local economies. The diplomatic fallout of these mass removals will be just as severe. African nations, many of which have maintained strong partnerships with the U.S., are already pushing back against these deportations. Countries like Nigeria, Ghana, and Egypt have long-standing trade and security agreements with Washington, yet their citizens are being removed with no regard for these relationships. The perception that the U.S. is unfairly targeting African nations will further strain diplomatic ties, pushing African governments to seek alliances elsewhere. China and Russia, both expanding their influence across Africa, will capitalize on the situation, offering trade deals, infrastructure investments, and diplomatic support without the hostility that Trump's administration is displaying. If African nations decide to turn away from the US and strengthen their partnerships with other global powers, it could reshape the balance of power in international politics. So, will Africa stand united against these unjust deportations, or will US economic pressure force compliance? Let us know in the comments section. Should Africans do something to stop it? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.